Hey everybody, welcome to J Stern Designs and welcome to the Prom Gown Sew Along. I apologize for yesterday's sort of truncated episode where I just showed you how to cut out fabric. I hurt my hip playing volleyball and it was really hard for me to sit up straight, and actually for a couple of days I couldn't even, get up and down the stairs. But the good news is I'm on the mend and I almost feel better. I still have a little soreness, but I wasn't even going to bring it up, but it got to the point where it was slowing me down and I had to cut my prom video short. So what I want to do is I want to finish up with what I was going to include yesterday. And actually, this is going to be a lot of great information by itself anyway, so I even thought of an extra thing to tell you. Okay, so if you're working with specialty fabrics and light colored fabrics, and maybe white lining, you want to make sure that your iron is clean before you start. If you're working on your ironing surface and it's really gross like mine, and I'm just going to flip this over and show you, you can see that it's really stained and not very attractive. I decided to just make a no fuss, no muss cover for it, and basically I just cut a piece of muslin out that was about 6 or 7 inches wider, or maybe 8 inches wider and longer than the surface. And then I just folded it and pinned it from underneath because it's one of those double-sided pressy boards. So now I have this nice, clean, fresh surface to press on, so I'm not gonna, make unwanted stains on my fabric. So that's something to think about when you're working on specialty fabrics. The other thing is you want to make sure you wash your hands, and if you have really dry hands, it's a good idea to moisturize them, and you want to moisturize them about a half an hour before you start, because if you put lotion on and then start working on your fabric, the oiliness or the lotion can get on the fabric if it's not completely absorbed into your skin. And if you've got dry skin on your hands, sometimes things like silk charmeuse or silks and different other things can pick on your skin and make it harder to work with. So wash your hands, put a nice hand lotion on. Another thing is, if you're working with a fabric that you're not sure about, making a prom gown or a special occasion dress, if that's not your normal pastime, can be a little daunting because you're working with fabrics that are unfamiliar to you if you don't sew with them on a regular basis. My Bible is this. It is Sandra Betzina's Fabric Savvy. I love this book because it will tell me what size needle to use, how to treat the fabric, what stitch length to use, so on and so forth. So if you have a good resource or a reference book for fabrics, that's super helpful. All right, so before we get started, I want to read a comment that I got on my blog. This is from Amelia, and she says, "I'm enjoying this series. Thank you for sharing with us. Can you explain why you chose to use fusible interfacing for charmeuse instead of underlining? I've always been afraid to use a fusible on delicate silk, but your sample looks lovely." Well, thank you, Amelia. All right, so here's the cool thing. When you're working with different silk fabrics or any kind of fabric really, you have the opportunity to test different techniques. And I take swatches and I'll try it. Now, definitely underlining silk charmeuse is the couture thing to do. It's the most wonderful, lovely thing to do. And generally when you're thinking about underlining, you want to pick one that's not as heavy or stiff as your garment fabric. So for a silk charmeuse, I probably would use a crepe de chine or something, or a silk lining fabric to line my silk charmeuse. If I wanted it to be crisp and it was small, you could use silk organza, but silk organza is a lot crisper than charmeuse, so it may cause it to ripple and bubble when you have it all together. So certainly underlinings are amazing, and if I wanted to spend the extra time to do that, I certainly would do that in this case. But I want to put the prom gown into perspective for you. You want it to look lovely. You want it to be beautiful. You want the person you're wearing it to feel amazing in it. But how many times are they going to wear it? They're going to wear it once, twice, maybe And actually, I know for a fact Abby's going to wear this one time. So I took a chance and I fused interfacing onto the wrong side of my silk charmeuse, and it worked beautifully. So that's what I'm going to do because it's time saving. And the other reason why in this case I'm doing that is because I'm going to be stitching lace directly on top of it. So you're not even going to really see the silk charmeuse on the bodice anyway. So that's why I chose to use an interfacing, a fusible interfacing, number one, for time and convenience, and number two, because it's really not going to show its full, face beauty because it's going to be covered with lace. Originally, I thought I'm going to show you how to do a French seam on silk charmeuse. Well, after test stitching, I've changed my mind on that. And the reason why is because silk charmeuse is very, it's sort of spongy and it's hard to press and get it to crease along a seam. And you can see in this sample right here, see how I've got a crease running along the seam. So when I went to fold it down, I couldn't get it to line right up on the sewing edge easily. So then I stitched some just regular seams, and I really liked the way they came out. I played around with the stitch length. I did one with a 3.5, and then I did one with a 2mm. And you can see when you compare these side by side that the 2mm stitch just looks a little bit smoother than the bigger stitch. Silk charmeuse likes a smaller stitch. All right, and when I checked in Fabric Savvy, the reference book, that was what she recommended as well, was a shorter stitch for silk charmeuse. So if you don't have a reference book, you can clearly figure out what the best seam treatment is just by testing. Now, another thing I want to talk about is, I'm going to remind us again, this is a prom gown or a specialty occasion dress. You're just going to wear it one time. You're going to get it dry cleaned. So you really don't have to worry about the seam allowances fraying very much. So what I'm going to do for the skirt pieces is I'm going to sew them with a regular seam. I'm going to press the seams open, and I'm going to call it a day. If you have sharp pinking shears, you could pink the edges first and then press them open. But I really don't think you need to finish these edges because the lining is going to cover these seams and protect them. So I think they're okay as is. So I'm not going to treat these seams with any sort of serging because I'm afraid that that stitching may show through on the fabric when you press. And instead of pressing down hard with the iron, I'm going to use my clapper. So I'm going to steam and then I'm going to press. And that keeps the seam allowances from showing through. So that's how I'm going to handle the seams on my silk charmeuse. If any of you are working with a sheer fabric that you need to do something with the raw edges because they show through, I want to show you how to do a French seam. And even though it didn't work out for this fabric, you do want to test your fabric because it could work out for the fabric you're working on. So let me just remind you why I didn't use it on this one. You can see how I couldn't get it to fold nicely, and I tried. Okay, I worked at it. So if I'm having this much of a hard time, I'm not going to bother unless it's absolutely necessary. Then I did a French seam. See how nice that looks? It makes a very delicate, nice finish. And on the right side of your fabric, you'll see this seam allowance, encased seam allowance on the wrong side. And then on the wrong side, you just press it to one side. It's a very neat, pretty finish. All right, so when you do a French seam, what you want to do is you want to sort of divide your total seam allowance in half. And I have a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew the first side, my first seam, at barely 1/4 inch. And you want to put your wrong sides together instead of your right sides together because you're flipping it twice and you want the seam allowance to end up on the wrong side. So you start out with wrong sides together, not right sides together. And on something like an organza, there really is no wrong side, so you really can't make a mistake. But if you've got a fabric that has an obvious right and wrong side, put your wrong sides together first. And I'm just going to stitch down. I'm using the side of my presser foot as a guide. So I'm doing like a barely 1/4. After the seam is sewn, it looks like this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my rotary cutter and my ruler and I'm going to trim that down to 1/8. And the reason why you want to do that is you don't want these raw edges to peek through when you encase them in the seam allowance. And if you trim them a little bit shorter, then you'll be sure not to have them peeking out. All right, so now I've got my seam, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to just give it some steam flat first. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up and I'm going to press it so that I'm pressing the seam allowances in one direction. And I kind of like to finger press it to get it in agreement before I start. So I've sort of got it knowing what I'm thinking. Like I want the fabric to know what I have in mind for it, sort of. So once I start finger pressing it, then I'm going to just press the seam allowances flat in one direction. The idea is you want it to form a nice crease along the seam, okay? Because then the next step is you're going to take it and fold it in half like this. And I like to, again, finger press it so that the seam is right on the fold. So I'm just going to sort of finger press my way down a little bit to get it agreeing with what I'm thinking. And then I'm going to just use the tip of my iron and I'm going to press it flat on itself like this. And silk organza is a perfect fabric to do a French seam on because you can achieve a nice crisp edge with almost no fuss and muss. See how nice that looks? All right, now the last step to the French seam is to sew again. And what you're going to do is you're going to sew another scant 1/4 of an inch, encasing those seam allowances. Okay, so I'm just going to stitch along, and you can see that the needle, is on the left side of my seam allowance. See how lovely that looks? Now we can go to the iron and press it flat again. All right, see how lovely that looks? That's how you do the French seam. And what I want to do now to sort of wrap up this cutout and start sewing episode is I want to show you the Strapless Foundation, and I fused it and sewed it together yesterday. So this is what the inside looks like, and you can see I've got these really generous seam allowances, so you can see they're 1 inch. All right, so I'm going to press all of these open, and then I'm going to treat them with some horsehair, and I'm going to show you how to do that in the next episode. I'm also going to show you how to apply boning to this. The one thing I want to say about boning is there's a lot of different kinds, but I'm going to get spiral steel boning. And the thing about that is you can actually get it by the roll and cut it to length and then put the tips on, but I'm going to get it the size I need. I had drawn in where I'm going to put my boning so I know what lengths I need. The big thing about boning is you want to have it stop about 1/8 of an inch before your seam on the top and bottom of the bodice. You don't want it jamming into the top, and you don't want it poking down at your waist. So when you measure, if you're going to get boning the length you need to measure it so it's about 1/8 of an inch away, top and bottom. Okay, so I'm going to order mine from Corset Maker, and I put a link to that in the post I did yesterday, and I'll have that ready to show you and how to work with in the next episode. So the schedule for this Prom Sew Along is this. Next week I'm going to social the social sewing retreat in Novi, Michigan, and I'm teaching there. So there will be no Prom Gown Sew Along next week. So this is going to be your chance to catch up, get fabric, order boning. Certainly you can ask me more questions because I will keep an eye on my on my blog, and if people ask questions, I will answer them next week. I will probably do some posts from social so you can see what's going on there. It's going to be super fun. I'm teaching a skirt drafting class, which I am so excited about because once you have your basic skirt, you can use that to design so many different style skirts. And actually, anytime I do a class like this, I end up with lots of new things to wear because I'm making a few skirts that are going to show the versatility of, working with a skirt draft and then making it into other things. So I'm super excited about that. So you'll get a peek at that when I'm at social. And then when I get back the week after, it's going to be prom gown crunch time. And I'm going to be finishing that up. So when we get back, I will show you my sewn skirt pieces because we cut them out yesterday. I'll cut out the lining. I'll have that all finished. We'll talk about how to put the boning into the Strapless Foundation. And then we're also going to talk about how to work with lace on netting. So that's going to be the week I get back. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift everything back a day. So I'm going to do it on Wednesday and Friday instead of Tuesday and Thursday. So that's the schedule for Prom Gown Sew Along. And I hope you guys are having a fun time watching this. I'm certainly having a fun time doing it because it's giving me all this fun material to talk to you and share with you. And then plus I'm also working on Abby's prom gown. So for me, it's a win-win. So I hope you're enjoying it, and I will see you soon, probably a peek next week, and then we'll be going full guns the week after. So have a great rest of your week, and please post your questions.